Hi, my name is Pam Killeen, and welcome to my podcast, Circadian Reboot, where we dive into all things circadian. I'm thrilled to share the fourth installment of my interview series with Morley Robbins, also known as the Magnesium Man. Morley is a leading researcher and educator in mineral metabolism, with a special focus on the critical interplay between copper and iron in chronic illness. After a successful 32-year career in the healthcare industry, he turned his attention to uncovering the root causes of disease, highlighting how mineral balance shapes cellular energy production and the management of oxidative stress. He's the creator of the Root Cause Protocol, a comprehensive approach designed to restore mineral harmony and support healing at the deepest level. Through his work, Morley has helped thousands of individuals and practitioners worldwide recognize how mineral dysregulation underlies modern health conditions, from fatigue and anxiety to autoimmune disorders and neurodegeneration. I'm especially excited to announce that his updated book, Cure Your Fatigue, will be released in November of 2025. It's a major contribution to the growing conversation about minerals and health, and I encourage listeners to look out for it. As someone who has been a mineral balancing practitioner since 2009, I've seen firsthand how powerful this work can be. When practitioners who share the same goals collaborate, especially those who understand the vital role minerals like copper and iron play in health, we give clients more tools, more confidence, and often a quicker path to healing. You'll find Morley's contact information in the show notes below so you can connect with his work directly. Today on the show, we have Morley Robbins. I'm very excited to have him on for the fourth time, and this time is even more exciting because he's here to announce his new book, his updated book, Cure Your Fatigue. And he has some new information in the book. He has some tighter information in the book. And so I'm going to encourage everybody, after you listen to this interview, to buy his book. It's going to be released in November of this year, 2025. But today we're going to do an overview of some of the topics that he covers in his book, and I'm going to try to prevent any repetition from our other interviews. I will invite you to go back to part 1, part 2, and part 3 of our interviews that we did. I think, Morley, it was back in May of 2025. So there's a lot of preliminary information you can glean from those interviews, but today we're going to try and focus on some new information and focus on some of the content that he has in his book, the updated content. But before we get started, I want to talk about something that I addressed with Morley already, and that is a big topic that is going throughout the internet these days, and it has to do with the success rates using anti-parasitic drugs, these repurposed anti-parasitic drugs, Ivermectin, Fenbendazole, mebendazole, and so on. And we have a Canadian oncologist here in Canada, a radiologist and oncologist, Dr. William Mackis, who is getting very, very good success rates using these antiparasitics on people who have stage 4 cancers. And within a month, 2 months, 3 months, these tumors are shrinking dramatically. And so I don't want to take anything away from the success rates that he's seeing. And he's not the only doctor, by the way, who's using these repurposed antiparasitic drugs. Many, many doctors are seeing similar results. And I think it's very exciting. I think it's very encouraging. But I think there's a lot more to the story as well that, Morley, I'd like for you to dive into, because we need to be addressing the root cause. We need to be looking at why the cancer is there in the first place. And I'm not a big fan of testimonials simply because I want to know how that person's doing 10 years from now. So I think I'd like to see sustainability with health. I don't want to see miraculous cures. I want to see how that person is feeling, how they're sleeping at night, what's their energy like. I want to know all these variables. And I know that, Morley, you and I are both very keen on getting to the root cause of the problem. And your take on things with regards to the relationship between copper, iron, oxygen, and so on, these are critical components to the underlying reasons why somebody might be feeling low energy or why somebody might be developing things like cancer. And I also need to say, as a preliminary, we're not here to treat cancer. We're not here to treat any disease. So I don't want anybody to take this information and think that they're going to be cured from cancer. We don't know you. We don't know your circumstances. But I think these very serious health conditions we need to look deeper than just at the label. We need to ask why it's happening in the first place. So with all that said, Morley, again, thank you so much for taking your very precious time to join us today. And if we can just launch with this subject, I think it's very powerful, and I think people need to hear what you have to say.
Pam, delighted to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. And we have a lot to talk about, obviously. But as it relates to what your opening volley is, I think we have to put it into context. I regard cancer metabolism. I don't think there's a disease per se. I think there's a cancer metabolism, which is a pre-ceruloplasmin metabolism. And for the folks who haven't heard that term, that's the copper protein that is the master antioxidant in our body. It's in all mammals, but there are different forms of it for different life forms on the planet. You have lactase enzyme, you have ascorbate oxidase, and you have ferrooxidase, and a number of other what are called multi-copper oxidases. And these are very powerful enzymes that help the life forms on planet Earth that's surrounded by oxygen deal with that oxygen. It's the second most reactive element on the planet after fluorine gas. Oxygen is our friend, but it's also our foe. If we can't metabolize it, if we can't turn it into water, we can't make energy. So I think it's important for people to know that there was a time when oxygen wasn't on the planet. There was a time when copper wasn't so important, but it goes way back in time, in the time machine. But the other is two important dimensions of this discussion. One is that in 1925, a very noted graduate of Hopkins, his name was Montrose T. Burroughs. I absolutely love his name. But in 1925, he was working at the Rockefeller Institute, which I always thought was in New York City, and in fact it's in Princeton, New Jersey. That's very telling. And he wrote an article in 1925 highlighting the fact that parasites cause cancer, which was a very bold assertion in that time. And then in 1926, he wrote 4 more articles reinforcing his position that it was a parasitic characteristic, that the parasites were causing the cancer. Now, what's playing in the background in 1926 is a struggle that the Nobel Committee was having, trying to decide who were they going to give the Nobel Prize for Physiology and Medicine. Was it going to be Otto Warburg, or was it going to be Dr. Fibinger, Johannes Fibinger? They were competing about what was the origin of cancer. Warburg was taking a metabolic stance. Fibinger was saying, actually, it's caused by parasites. And so the committee struggled for a year on who to give the award to. It wasn't until 1927 that they gave out the award. And let me just clarify what I said about Dr. Montrose. He actually said that the cancer was a deficiency in retinol. It wasn't parasitic. It was a deficiency in retinol. My apologies. But in 1927, the Nobel Committee decided to give the award to Fibinger, much to the enragement of Dr. Warburg. A year later, Fibinger is taking up sides with Dr. Burroughs, saying that actually I think it's a retinol deficiency. And within 4 months of publishing that article, he was dead. Now why is this important? Because in 2016, a famed biochemist named Ulrich Hammerling published a very important article about how retinol deficiency causes the Warburg effect. And there's a mechanism in our mitochondria. For those who are familiar with the mitochondria, know there's an electron transport chain. It's the train track that the electrons go down, and oxygen's moving down that same train track. And between complex 3 and complex 4, it's a very critical transfer of electrons to turn oxygen into water to release ADP, which then subsequently becomes ATP at complex 5. It's a really big deal. And this complex is called the signalosome, and it has a very intricate structure, but the bottom half of it is a retinol molecule. And according to Dr. Hammerling, the electrons ride the carbon tail of retinol to get from complex 3 to complex 4. And when that happens, voila, we're able to make water. But when that does not happen, if retinol is deficient, we have the Warburg effect, which is named in Dr. Warburg's honor, but he didn't actually coin it. But what it's saying is that even in the presence of oxygen, the tissue chooses to use anaerobic metabolism to make energy, which is the most inefficient form of energy production on the planet. And again, it makes perfect sense because it would be pre-ceruloplasmin, pre-copper physiology. And what he asserts is that this is, in fact, the very dynamic that causes cancer. So tuck that aside, and then let's fast forward. Also in 2016, so we have Hammerling in a very sophisticated article talking about the importance of retinol. And then we have a very pragmatic animal farmer named Pat Colby down in Australia, writing a series of books called Natural Goat Care, Natural Horse Care, Sheep Care, and Cattle Care. They're wonderful books. I would encourage your followers to pick up at least one or more of them. It's just wonderful wisdom inside those books. But what Pat Colby points out is that any animal that is missing copper will have parasites. Any animal with parasites is missing copper. And I think what we're witnessing now is the term that's used a lot on Google or in your research. You might look up copper deficiency. I'm afraid that what we're facing now with this acceleration of cancer, soon to be the number one cause of death on the planet, to surpass heart disease, I think what we're witnessing is a really serious deficiency or depletion of copper in mammalian physiology. And I think the whole notion that these agents are being used, like the ivermectin, tells us that if they're working, and they do work, they're working because the individual who's using them is copper deficient, has no capacity to kill the pathogen. And the beauty of copper is it's the ultimate antimicrobe. It doesn't just kill parasites, it kills all microbes. It's legendary in its ability to zap all of the critters. The part that people didn't know about during the COVID era is that everyone was being told to use zinc to stop the replication of the virus, when in fact copper would just kill the virus. So you don't have to worry about replication, it just would just kill the virus. And so during that era, I started doing research on the immune system and identified 52 articles that clearly corroborated that copper regulates the immune system. So especially the innate, but also the adaptive immune systems. And so I think there's a lot of lost wisdom on the planet, but also on the internet. And so I'm with you 100%. I don't want to take away any of the success of these, what are considered miracle cures, but I'm not sure they are returning us to factory settings, our original factory settings. I think they are doing their job in the face of significant nutrient deficiencies in our body, not the least of which is lack of copper and lack of retinol. And when those are down, iron is rising in the tissue, and there's a very clear pattern that in tumors, there's tremendous iron accumulation in the tumor, which it completely changes the physiology of that tissue. And I think that's really what we're grappling with. But
you talk about the seesaw effect then. So if you do reduce your parasitic load, then
right.
That in turn takes a lot of the stress off and will reduce iron accumulation as well. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, what I just recently came across to that point, I think what we're really facing now, we're a century into iron fortification. They first started fortifying foods or suggesting iron fortification and iron supplementation after the First World War. So we're about a century in. And of course, major changes during the Second World War, and there's just been this acceleration and a lot of use of iron infusions, which I now call iron invasions. But I think what's important for people to realize is that the iron issue is overlooked because people don't realize that there's a backside to iron. It's going to create a lot of oxidative stress. And there is a this seesaw, as you're talking about, that when copper's down, iron is going to rise. That's well established going back to 1928. Several very noteworthy studies were done. But what I learned recently was an individual by the name of Constantine Adroctus. He's originally from Athens, Greece. He did his training as an engineer at MIT, got both a bachelor's and master's degree back in, it would have been the early 60s. 62 and 63 was when he got his degrees. He was born in 1940. He is the individual who actually made the first usable electric car over in Athens. A very, very noteworthy guy. He's no longer with us. He passed away in 2020, probably from COVID. But he developed in his 70s a condition called MDS, which stands for myelodysplasia syndrome. And the hematologist would tell you it's an iron problem. The intelligentsia would tell you it's a copper problem. And so Mr. Adoctus was able to find a hematologist who was willing to chelate iron from his body. He must have known that he was accumulating iron. And they used a very effective iron chelator called XJADE. That's the trade name for the furoxamine, but EXJADE. And over a period of, I think it was almost 6 months, they were pulling this iron out of his tissue. And he was meticulous in recording where his iron status was, but also where his copper status was. He knew that copper was affected by this dynamic, which is very impressive in and of itself. And after several months of this maximum dose of XJADE, suddenly his copper came up to ideal levels, just over 100, and his ceruloplasmin was at a near perfect 29, and he felt like $1 million. After they took the iron out, and he wasn't taking copper supplements. That's what was the most amazing part. But what he shared in the articles that he wrote about his experience was that he could not find any hematologist, either in Greece, in Europe, or in the States, that would acknowledge that copper has a relationship to iron. They are solely focused on iron, and they ignore copper as the catalyst. And I think what we're witnessing now in modern society is this complete extraction of copper from the iron crisis that's taking place on the planet. And people are relying on practitioners who've been trained by very one-sided scientists who are only talking about iron. And they're not talking about the fact that copper regulates iron in our body. And so
Yeah, and it's really frightening, Morley. I know so many people who take iron supplements still to this day, and I try to warn them not to take it, and you have to deal with a deeper issue, but they're so brainwashed to believe that they need to be taking iron.
Well, it's a safe thing to do. Everyone's telling you, take more iron. And that's part of the meme that runs medicine is, you're anemic, you're copper toxic. We've got to flip that meme around and find out, oh, actually, we're drowning in iron because we don't have copper in our diet. And we've talked about the changes in farming and food processing that have affected copper status in the food. And I think the iron is in a runaway situation. Very few people really grasp what you're talking about, the downside danger of iron accumulation. We're building up at least 1 milligram of iron every day we're on the planet. And I think what happens is iron goes into hiding. It actually gets sequestered. It's a very fancy word for safekeeping. It gets put into safekeeping because the innate immune system knows, well, the iron is going to feed the pathogens. So we got to keep it away from the pathogens. So they pull the iron out of the blood into the macrophages, which makes perfect sense. But what we then have to deal with is, so we've dealt with the extracellular pathogens. Now we've got iron building in the intracellular pathogens. And that, I think that's where the cancer comes in, is this exposure to a lot of sequestered iron. And I've not read any articles that would corroborate that. It's just me thinking intuitively, well, if we're taking it out of the extracellular, we're packing it into the intracellular, where's the cancer going to start? It's going to start inside the cell. So it's
You talk about the
if you don't have
Ferris wheel and the water wheel and the role of the mitochondria as well. And you call the mitochondria smithies because they're basically
Yeah,
processing. They're supposed to be processing things like
I think
iron
it's their biggest
properly.
job. In the same way that a blacksmith has a forge, putting out a lot of energy, a lot of heat, I think that's really what the mitochondria is doing, is providing energy to deal with the iron. And I'm not alone. There's some very sophisticated hematologists that have made that observation. But it changes the whole notion of why does the mitochondria exist. It may not just be to make energy. It's making energy for a reason. We got to deal with this iron. It is a nonstop issue throughout our lives that we have to make good on.
Well, a lot of people I know who are treated conventionally with cancer, for example, they go through the cut, poison, and burn route. They'll go through the treatment, and yeah, maybe they got rid of their cancer or lessened the impact of the cancer, something along that line. But they come out of that treatment and they're still exhausted, Morley. And they don't measure success rates in terms of the quality of their lives, which is unfortunate.
No, I think at the end of the day, it's a small percentage of people who are willing to step out of the world of convention and think differently about what is causing all this illness. What's the origin? Has the food system changed? Has farming changed? Have the pharmaceutical processes changed? And they all have changed. And there are other factors as well. But I don't think the average person wants to take the time to think holistically about the problem. And it's an ongoing challenge to wake people up that there's more to the story. There absolutely is more to the story. And what they're getting from conventional practitioners is a very, very narrow slice of the truth. They're not getting the full scope of what's going on inside our body. And I think that's
Well,
where
as
the
the
real
expression
breakthrough.
goes, Morley, a little bit of knowledge can be a very dangerous thing.
That's right. Exactly. No, that's exactly. And what they know is believable. I call it the simple lie versus the complex truth. Your iron is low in the blood. You're anemic. No, I've just finished two courses, online courses on anemia. One is a starter course. It's 90 minutes. There's a full course, 3 hours. It is fascinating what most people don't know about what causes low iron on a blood test. Has nothing to do with iron. Has nothing to do with iron. And it has to do with lack of copper, lack of retinol, incredible stress, and pathogens. And the pathogens are very good at stealing our iron. And it's absolutely amazing. And so I try to kind of weave that together in this teachable moment. But people just don't realize how much information is out there, first of all, but also how little of that information is taught in formal medical education.
Speaking of information, I congratulate you on your updated book, Cure Your Fatigue. And I
Thank you.
noticed that there are some new aspects to your book. You have a chapter about women's health. There we go. Cure Your Fatigue. See you, Copper.
That's right.
And I know that you lessened any kind of repetition. You got a really thorough endnote section. There's some new aspects to your book. If they already have your first book, they still get a lot out of getting your next book. And it's going to be released
Yeah.
this November 2025. So what prompted
Yep.
you to update your book? What prompted you to write another book?
The guest writer, his name is Larry Trivieri, great guy. He's written dozens of very successful health books. He was talking with a friend of his who knew the CEO of Ben Bella Books. And Larry said, this is a great book. It just deserves a bigger audience. So she spoke to the CEO, and then that led to us having a conversation with Glenn Yeffeth, great guy, running the Ben Bella Books. They've published books like, people might have heard of the China Syndrome, or Lies I Taught in Medicine, or Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. These are all part of their health series. And when he heard my pitch, why I got started, and began to understand the total disconnect, he said, well, the real focus of our publishing company is we like to take controversial ideas and make them popular. I said, well, you've met your match. And he said, great. And so we were able to work out a deal. And I think it's going to be interesting to see what a broader audience now will think about these inconvenient truths, as some people say, because I think there's so much disinformation out there. I think it's time, my personal opinion is it's time for the truth to get out and let people come to their own conclusion. I'd rather give people more information and let them make their own decision than just going with the party line. And so that's what we've tried to do with the second book, is go a little deeper into why copper is so important. Take a little bit of the venom out of it. Stop blaming the doctors for the problem, because it's not their doing. And then the footnote section is really, and at the risk of sounding braggadocious, I think it's a really impressive array of articles that will help people understand the research side of this topic. And then the part that you mentioned a few minutes ago, it's absolutely staggering how many of the health issues that women deal with that all relate to this copper-iron conflict, that they've never been known that was the issue. And so I think it's a unique opportunity to spread the gospel, but again, take a part of society that is most worried about not just their health, but their family's health, get them to realize that this pesky iron is at the basis of virtually all of their symptoms. I think it'll be a real eye-opener for people to be aware of that.
And you have a new section on women's health as well. So what prompted you to write a chapter about women's health?
Because they're the most focused on health as a group. I think women, especially as they get older, are grappling with the health of their children and the health of their parents. And then, of course, they're worrying about their own health. And so they have this tripartite focus on, why is everyone in my family not feeling well? And I think what the book does is it gives them a very practical how-to approach to how do we stop this? How do we resolve this relentless sea of symptoms?
Right. And you're a fan, like I am, of Weston A. Price Foundation and returning to traditional foods and nutrient-dense foods, organ meats, and so on, as a resource to help build important nutrients in the body, such as copper. But the emphasis is on returning to this ancient wisdom, to return to foods that we've been scared off of for the last 50, 60 years.
Totally. Absolutely true. I think it's important for people to realize that it's not a complicated process to overcome this confusion. And that's really why I wrote the first book and why I'm excited to have the second book, is just to introduce people to the wisdom of our body. The level of sophistication of our metabolism and our immune system it's breathtaking. And so I think people need to know that there is some deep wisdom in our body about how to deal with this. And we live in a society where we basically are told that our bodies are stupid and they don't know what to do. And you need a priest to solve it. You don't need a priest. I think the body, when it's properly nourished, knows exactly what to do. And what I just learned a couple of days ago, I was planning to go to the Weston A. Price meeting. I was looking forward to just being there as an attendee. Well, it turns out they had a last-minute cancellation, and I'm going to be on the faculty on Saturday afternoon in Salt Lake City. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that's on the 18th, if I get that right. 18th or 19th of October. So I'm going to school people up on the value of copper in an ancestral diet and why it's so important.
Excellent.
So I'm looking forward
Excellent.
to that.
Yeah, I spoke at their conference many, many years ago now. Wise Traditions. It's a great conference. They do it every year in the fall.
Absolutely. And great food as well.
Oh, incredible food. Yeah, definitely. Now, what I love about your book as well is you do marry all these concepts together. I'm a big fan of the work of Jack Kruse and resetting your circadian rhythms and, the quantum biology. Big fan of the copper iron equation as well. But what you're doing in your book is you're marrying it all together, because I really see the importance of setting your circadian rhythm, getting adequate sunshine, fresh air, minimizing your exposure to blue light at night, and so on. You do address a lot of these things in your book as well, because they too are tied into innate wisdom. So I think it's the marriage of everything together, the synergy of everything together, that can really enhance our health. So I think it's great that you did address all those things in the book, because they do tap into our ancestral wisdom. So I don't know if you had that in your first book, but it's certainly there in this current book. So I think that's fantastic. You're tying everything together,
Yeah.
Morley.
Well, I appreciate that. We touched on it briefly in the first book, but I think we go into it deeper in the second book. And it's just, at the end of the day, we're trying to minimize stress in people's lives. And what I've learned of late is how powerful that stress dynamic is and how it affects our copper iron physiology. It really changes the whole landscape of how these metals work together. And copper is getting suppressed, iron is getting sequestered, and it's creating the illusion of deficiency, and that's inviting these iron invasions, as I call them. And people don't realize the mismatch of logic. And you're referencing it as a copper-iron equation. That's a great way to describe it. Sometimes I refer to it as a calculus. But the point is, people need to know that the copper's in charge. It's the general, and iron is the foot soldier. And the equation relies on that relationship between the two. So I think it's a great way to describe it.
Yeah, you often say we're struggling with an energy crisis, right? And we have to ask ourselves why. We can't just normalize it. A lot of people will say, oh, it's because I had babies, or I'm getting older, or what have you. But we have a genuine energy crisis within our bodies today. Yeah, I think you talk about 60% of the population is struggling with low energy. I think it's much, much higher than that, quite honestly. I think a lot of people simply just settle.
Well, and to me, where it really becomes important is as long as we're on the planet, we're going to have stress. As long as we're above ground, there will be stress. And we need to be able to respond to that stress. And my favorite definition of stress comes by way of Mark Hyman, a functional doctor at the Cleveland Clinic, that I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with. But his definition for stress is the body's inability to make energy for the mind to respond to its environment. That's a wonderful encapsulation of all the different players. But what he's really describing is resilience. When we have stress, we need to be able to respond with energy. We need to have resilience and a response that allows us to deal with that stress. That's why I think we're at a disadvantage now, is so many people can't mobilize energy to respond to the set of stressors that they're dealing with. And there are very specific reasons why. There are very specific enzymes, metabolic pathways, neuropeptides that are involved in resilience. And the one that's, I think, is most captivating is there are anatomically on either side of our brainstem, you got to go in a little bit, but on either side of our brainstem are blue dots. And those blue dots have a Latin name called the locus ceruleus, and that's Latin for blue spot. And these blue spots have 10 times more copper than our brain. Really important copper centers in the body. What are they really involved in? Well, people have heard of the vagus nerve, the wanderer. Well, where does the vagus nerve end its journey? It ends it at the locus ceruleus. And what the vagus nerve is all about is it's monitoring the activity in our body, especially in our organs. And it's saying, Houston, we have a problem. It will pick up inflammatory issues, pathogenic issues, what have you. And what the locus ceruleus is really good at is releasing neurotransmitters and neuropeptides to deal with that stress. And it's a major center for chemistry, but it's also a major center for an enzyme that we've talked about, I'm sure, the Pam enzyme, that activates these chemicals so that the body can actually respond to the stress. And so what's the first sign of neurodegeneration? These spots lose their blue color. They start to fade. And there's a famous article called, "Hey Doc, what's that blue spot on my MRI?" And they will show up on an MRI in a very vibrant way. And I think it's useful for people to know that there is this wisdom and this signal in our body that needs to be nourished and understood. We don't need to become neuroanatomists to understand that there's a part of our body that recognizes stress and produces 70% of the noradrenaline that our brain relies on to deal with inflammation. And what is noradrenaline?
It's interesting. I'm writing a book about parasites, and of course, I'm going to be addressing your work in the book. But one interesting thing is when you are under a lot of stress and cortisol increases, this encourages parasitic overgrowth. as well. As you know, there's a whole domino effect that we could talk about, and we have addressed it a little
Absolutely.
bit. But it's just amazing what stress does to the body. And I see people when they're under a lot of stress, I wonder, oh my goodness, how many parasites are they dealing with as well? Not just the thought of the stress or what the stress is doing physiologically, but long term, if it encourages a parasitic overgrowth, my goodness, the side effects of that as well, terrible.
There's a really important dimension to what you just brought up. So when we're under that kind of stress, that chronic stress, there's two hormones that are going to get released, cortisol and adrenaline. And they both have a deep relationship with copper and iron. So cortisol, when it's released, it's going to increase the production of metallothionein. And what is metallothionein going to do? It's going to bind up copper 1,000 times stronger than it binds up zinc. And again, the body has this wisdom. Okay, there's a lot of copper that's being released by ceruloplasmin because there's an inflammatory process. Let's make sure that copper doesn't become an issue. But there's a 4 to 5-fold increase in metallothionein in the presence of cortisol. What's happening on the adrenaline side? Well, adrenaline triggers a major pathway called STAT3, STAT3. And what does STAT3 do? Well, it increases the production of interleukin 6, which is the cytokine that is responding to inflammation. And what does interleukin 6 do? It increases the production of hepcidin, which is the iron hormone. And what does hepcidin do? It shuts down iron recycling. It's the mechanism to sequester iron. So what have we got? Under stress, we have this shutdown of copper and iron, and that's why we can't make energy. That's where the lack of energy comes from. And I think it's really important for people to know that there is this elegant response to stress, and what we have to do is make sure that we can release the fear that we're in when we're in chronic stress, but also make sure that we are mobilizing these metals, because the most important thing for iron is to be in circulation, in recycling around the body, and that requires copper. So we can't keep the copper locked up in metallothionein. So it's a very important relationship.
What I love about the work that you do is you're always learning, Morley. You don't stop learning. And I heard you talking about another protein in the body, I think it's uromodulin, and how that's affecting UTIs, which is I took care of my father for many, many years before he passed away. And uromodulin, of course, plays a role in preventing UTIs, which is a big problem as people get older. But I was happy to hear you talking about uromodulin and its relationship with copper. But it's something that with people aging and UTIs and the side effects of that are devastating. But I mean, now that you've narrowed in on the uromodulin and copper, I think a lot of people are going to want to hear about this, because if they're caring for an aging parent, maybe there's something we can do to prevent or offset this condition that happens so often in seniors.
Absolutely. You want me to grab a real quick picture of it?
Sure.
Yeah. Can I do that? Right over here.
Here we go. There we go.
So this is a picture of a UTI. This is the E. coli that causes the urinary tract infection. And we have up here the tissue, urothelium, endothelium, in the bladder. And what we see here is that, in fact, ceruloplasmin and copper play a very important role to stop these pathogens. And then it goes one step farther. The beauty of ceruloplasmin is that it makes sure that the iron is turned into a form of iron that can be stored, so it doesn't feed the pathogens. And this relates to the uromodulin as well. There's a very close relationship between these dynamics and uromodulin, so that if uromodulin goes south, this is the backup plan. And people need to know that if people are getting recurrent UTIs, it means they're copper deficient and their ceruloplasmin is not expressing itself properly. Unfortunately, Pam, it's not rocket science.
Mm-hmm.
And so
all they can do is give them antibiotics, and it's really, there's side effects to that. Things are going to get worse.
Because the antibiotic of choice is Cipro. And what does Cipro do? It chelates copper out of the body. People who take Cipro have tendon tears. And that's from a lack of lysyl oxidase, which is prevented by one enzyme called lysyl oxidase, which is copper dependent. So the action of Cipro is to pull the copper so that the pathogens can't get to it. Wink, wink. But what are what are our mitochondria? Oh, they're called purple bacteria. And so they're pulling copper out of the very mechanism that's essential for our well-being. And people aren't aware of that. And that's why UTIs are easily treated nutritionally and with proper supplementation, not with
Exactly.
in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, it's unfortunately, it's something that a lot of men and women have to deal with as they get older.
The copper's falling as we get older. Iron's rising as we get older. And that's what we've got to deal with, is that there's a growing spread between copper and iron as we get older. And that is a primal biological aspect to our body that I think everyone should know about. This is not rocket science. It's just not taught in the classroom for health practitioners. They don't focus
And
on
I know
the
your
numbers.
book, you deal with how to deal with it. If people want to learn your protocol, they can find it on your website, the Root Cause Protocol. And in your book, you talk about strategies you can use to lower your iron, increase your copper, or usability of copper. But you talk about bloodletting. I mean, essentially donating blood as a way to try and reduce your iron. And so with men and women, you have different schedules to do this. I guess you see a lot of positive effects after people go and donate their blood.
Tremendous effects, positive effects. And there's a famous iron biologist, Ed Weinberg, at Indiana University, back in the 50s through 70s. He was very prominent in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, probably was when he was at his peak. But at the first sign of an illness, he would go to the Red Cross and donate a pint of blood, because it took a swath of iron out of his body that the pathogens wouldn't have access to. So he was a very strong proponent of staying on constant readiness to share the blood with the blood bank and not with the pathogens.
So there's a lot of good things
But it
that people
worked.
can do, very practical things people can do to help increase their energy through all of your strategies. Is there anything else that you want to share with us about your book or about your work before we sign off? Because I know you have another meeting to go to in a few minutes here.
Yeah, we've updated we call it the starter guide. So folks who are interested in this process, it's rcp123.org, and go to the resources tab and then donate your email address, and we'll protect it and respect that. But we'll send you what's called the starter guide. It's an 11-page document that cuts to the chase. What are the stops? What are the starts? What's the schedule? And answers many of the fundamental questions that people have. I think people find it a very useful guide for their getting started and learning how the body really works, particularly as it relates to these key minerals and their relationship to oxygen that's causing all the problems in our body.
Yeah, well, and it's a great resource. And again, the release date of the book is November 11th, is that right?
Armistice Day, November 11th. I'm not sure why they picked that date, but it's kind of fitting. But maybe we'll end the war against humanity with iron. How's that? But
There we go.
I think that
That would be wonderful if we can get people back feeling good again. Yeah.
no, I think
It's
it's
just
very
too much
fitting
suffering going on out there.
yeah, I don't think people realize how a lot of this distress started right after the First World War. So it's very fitting that we have a book being published on Armistice Day. It's kind of funny, actually.
Yeah. And you look at the war on cancer, it hasn't done anything to help cancer. The semantics
No,
around some of this is crazy.
no, and just the use of the word war would tell you that it's just going to go on and on and on.
Yeah,
So I
as long
appreciate
as
the
they can
chance to
keep
have that
making money.
conversation. Exactly, absolutely, and I appreciate being able to share these pearls of wisdom with your community.
Well, listen, it's so great to have you back on, Morley, and maybe we can talk again in a few months after your book has gained some more momentum, which I'm sure it will. And yeah, I really congratulate you on all of your work, and I enjoy following your work. Thank you so much for your time and all the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today. And I know you have to run off, so yeah, let's just keep in touch, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show again soon.
Thanks so much, and good luck with your book. I'm looking forward to reading it, because I'm sure it's going to be chock full of some very important information. So thank you for doing that. That's great.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Morley. Thank you for taking your precious time to listen to today's podcast. For more information about my health coaching services, feel free to visit my website, www.pamkilleen.com. That's KILLEN. And there you'll find many articles, podcasts, and more information about my health coaching services. I'm also on Substack. And finally, to finish, here is the disclaimer. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. We are not licensed healthcare providers, and our content is not a substitute for professional medical diagnosis, advice, or treatment. For personalized health guidance, or if you have specific medical concerns, please consult a qualified medical professional. They can assess your individual health needs and offer recommendations tailored to you. By listening to our podcast, you agree to this disclaimer. We assume no responsibility or liability for actions taken based on the information provided herein.